Hi, folks. I wanted to share some thoughts and actually ask for your input on this theme of trust in AI implementation in a corporate context. It feels quite different, trust in AI, than trust in other corporate technologies. And I think we're sort of trying to work through this at the moment. I don't think answers are clear. As with everything to do with AI, it's emerging and emerging quickly. I think one of the ways of expressing this is a quote from Arthur Weasley to his daughter Ginny in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. He says, "What have I always told you? Never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain." And that sort of made me think about generative AI a little bit. Apologies if Harry Potter's a culture war reference, but we'll move on. I think I'd like to share some thoughts. So on the left-hand side of us, the technology market, the market environment, and there's some interesting sort of characteristics around trust here. I think the technology itself is very powerful and incredibly impressive. Almost every time I use it, certainly, but it gets stuff wrong. It makes mistakes. How does that make you feel about a very, very powerful technology? It has no regard for the truth. Generative AI is a prediction machine, and what's the most useful likely token. So it's not really about the truth. So that's an interesting characteristic. Where does the data come from? How's the data handled? How's it trained? The fact that those mistakes are still out there is an interesting point of after a good few years of development. It's still the case. The technology companies themselves, obviously have significant economic sway, and significant investment. Incentives are relatively clear, perhaps, but not always. Where technology businesses used to be, take a more of the moral high ground, perhaps, and they're now sort of working much more explicitly with the defence industry. Implications for energy security and the environment, etc. So there's these kind of ethical considerations around technology companies that are probably more prevalent now than they used to be, and clearly, bias and managing and handling, and this alignment challenge, or however you describe it, is a really important sort of moral consideration around technology businesses and those that we might partner with, and how they're guiding the technology development itself. And obviously, this pairs up with the theme of regulation. Is regulation there? Is a free market to be encouraged, to encourage the sort of innovation and help the market develop as quickly and effectively as possible, which encourages this sort of this incredible breathless pace of innovation, or should we be seeking and encouraging more protection for us as consumers and citizens, maybe for the environment, etc. I think this sort of sense of the intent and the objectives of regulation is kind of an interesting consideration in the technology market as well. We've not really seen that perhaps in other forms of technology to the same extent. In the corporate environment itself, internal governance, its transparency and integrity are really important. Every organization that we've researched, and on the vendor side and the corporate side, has some kind of policy statement, and guidelines around sort of the use and application of artificial intelligence to reassure people, and that's perfectly appropriate. But that act of reassurance also then actually signals that there's risk here. These are powerful and potentially dangerous tools. So it's interesting, in trying to reassure, we also highlight the fact that there's risk. I think it's be interesting to see how those statements develop over the coming years as well. Clearly, how reliable, relevant, useful is the implementation in our own organisations of these technologies? Is this helping or not? Is productivity improving? Am I a better researcher, a better writer, etc.? How well are these things working? Helps to sort of to raise that level of trust or erode it, in fact. And I think one of the characteristics that's quite interesting is about the sort of the clarity of the business case benefits for investment, particularly on the corporate side. Are these business cases for AI around efficiency and saving perfectly legitimate, but might make you feel a certain way, particularly as an employee? Are they about innovation, product development? Is this about competition? Is it about revenue growth, etc.? All of these things are obviously perfect, wrapped in. But how clear is that? And are those is that story well told in the organisation? I think it's a really important part of the environment in which we do or don't trust artificial intelligence. And then lastly, on the employee or us as users, as punters, are we trusted to use these tools? Are we prevented from using them? Sort of actively prevented or actively encouraged, or in some cases actually almost mandated to use them. That frames our judgment of whether these are trustworthy companions in in the workplace or not. And I think we'll wait and see how, which of those approaches bears the most fruit, not just in terms of trust, but also in terms of efficacy and productivity, and and those business case benefits, etc. How well do we understand these technologies? Are we au fait with reasoning models, with RAG, with the difference between a chat LLM and a reasoning model, etc. How confident are we? Are we supported and developed and trained? I think all of these are really important considerations. And lastly, this sort of sense of how much of our job and career agency feels supported or potentially undermined or called into question. I think there's some really important characteristics around trust and implementation of artificial intelligence in organizations that we don't normally see, to the forefront of decision making that we do with AI at the moment. Anyway, so I'd be interested to know, what do you make of this? Is this a red herring? Is it just all about how good the tech is? How do you see this in your organization? What's the context? What's working? Maybe how optimistic are you? I'd love to hear what you think. Thank you.